Hi everyone, it's Kirstine from the Mustard Tree Trust. So the next part of the story for the early church actually goes back to Peter. Now Peter was a Jew. That means he'd been brought up knowing that God's special people, the chosen family, were Jewish. All the laws, all the Bible, stories, all of those things were for the Jewish people. But one night, Peter had a vision, it's a bit like a dream, and he was told by God that the message of Jesus wasn't just for the Jews. The message of Jesus was for the whole world. Well, that really surprised Peter. I mean, he was surprised that Philip went and spoke to their enemies. But the Jews and Samaritans lived in a similar sort of part of the world, and they had similar ideas, even though they chose to serve God in different ways. But the whole world? People who weren't Jewish? People who weren't from God's chosen family? That would really have surprised Peter. It would probably have blown his mind. But he took on what God had said, and he started to tell people all about Jesus, and to tell people from all over the world. And Peter started moving from one place to another and talking about how the Jews weren't God's chosen people and how actually Jesus was for everybody. Well, as you can imagine, that got him into a bit of trouble. And we're going to start our story today where, well, let's see, it was certainly getting Peter in hot water. So we're going to take the next part of the story from this book. And it's about King Herod. Now, it's probably a different King Herod to the one that was around when Jesus was born. In fact, I think it's about 3 kings later. He was a seriously bad guy. He hated this new church. He caught one of the apostles called James and he chopped his head off. Ew! But actually, he thought it would be a good idea to catch the rest. But don't worry, we'll find out what Peter has in store. Herod caught Peter and put him in prison. You see, there was a special festival happening and nobody would be really interested in what was happening with Peter. So Herod decided to wait a little while until everybody had finished celebrating, and then they might have been a bit more interested and might have wanted to join in a bit more. Herod really didn't want Peter to escape. That would make him look a bit stupid, wouldn't it? So he chained him up and he put 4 sets of soldiers out to guard him. Now, when the Church of Jesus followers found out that Peter had been captured and locked up, they prayed and prayed and prayed. On Peter's last night in prison, probably the night before Herod was going to kill him, he was trying to get some sleep. He was lying on the floor and soldiers all around him, and eventually he nodded off. But after a while, someone poked him. Oh, that was really annoying. So Peter ignored him. And then he felt somebody else poke him. So he rolled over to poke that one as well. And when he opened his eyes, it wasn't a guard who was poking him, but a glowing man standing above him. He was the one who had been doing the poking. You see, the soldiers were still snoring their heads off. And even though it was in the middle of the night and the cell was super bright, Peter had to squint just to see the man standing there. I must be dreaming. I really must be dreaming, thought Peter. But it was pretty awesome, so he was quite happy. The glowing man was probably an angel, thought Peter. And then it spoke. Hi, you need to be quick. Come on, quick, quick. So Peter stood up and the chains on his arms and his legs just fell off. And the snoring soldiers didn't even move. Quick, quick, put your belt on and don't forget your coat, said the angel. Come on, let's get out of here. So Peter followed his new friend down lots of twisty-turny corridors and past loads of soldiers who looked to be awake but didn't seem to see him. Must be a dream, thought Peter. Then they arrived at this huge big gate and it just opened by itself. They walked straight through. Well, hey, this is amazing, thought Peter. Thanks for getting me out, but how did you do it? Silence. And Peter turned his head and his friend had gone. He couldn't see him anymore. He just disappeared. No way. But what was even more strange, because Peter was actually standing in the middle of the street. He wasn't in prison anymore. He was actually outside the prison. Wow! God must have sent an angel to burst him out of prison to protect him from Herod. Epic! He quickly realised that he couldn't just stand in the middle of the street, so he thought he'd go to Mark's mum's house, which is where lots of people were meeting. When he got to Mark's mum's house, though, loads of people were there already praying for him. They were praying that Peter would be all right, that Peter would escape from prison, that Peter wouldn't get killed by Herod. So when he arrived, he knocked on the door. Rhoda was a girl who worked for Mark's mum. When she opened the door and saw Peter, she was so excited. She shut the door in his face and ran back to tell everybody who was praying. She was squealing and jumping, going, "He's out! It's Peter! It's Peter! He's out! He's outside now!" "Don't be silly, he's in prison, Rhoda," said some of the people who were praying. "Maybe he just looks like somebody who looks like Peter." Rhoda said, "I know he was in prison, but I'm telling you, he's outside at the minute." Meanwhile, Peter was kind of standing outside. He was probably getting a little bit cold. So he knocked on the door again. And eventually, somebody went to open the door. Well, when they opened it and saw that it really was Peter, they squealed and jumped upside down in excitement as well. "Shh," said Peter as he squeezed through the door. "It's all right. God sent his angel to get me." And then when he finally got them all to be quiet, they listened to the whole story. "Tell everybody what's happening," he said. "Tell everybody what God has done." And then he went, because he wanted to continue on his way, telling everybody in the whole world all about Jesus. So that's a really interesting story. You know, Peter sometimes didn't do the right things, did he? Sometimes he did stuff and then thought about it afterwards and realised it wasn't necessarily the right thing to say. Sometimes he was really courageous, like when he decided that he was going to step out of that boat and actually not worry about the wind and the waves and just walk on the water with Jesus. Sometimes he was a bit grumpy. Do you remember when he was called to follow Jesus? And he'd been out all night fishing and there was no fish, and he was a bit grumpy with Jesus, wasn't he? But whatever Peter did, he was pretty awesome. And he followed Jesus and followed what God told him as much as he could. Maybe that's a lesson for us. How good are we at following Jesus? How good are we at doing things that you know that God wants you to do? That's a challenge for me too. But this main part of the story is about how the Jews were still God's chosen family, but actually the Jesus story was for us all, and that includes you and me. So how cool is it that I can continue to tell these stories to you and the whole world? It's been really good to chat with you again. And there's one more assembly for this series, and then it'll be your summer holidays. Have a great time, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.